Back at the start of lockdown, we bought this hot tub. I haven't used it for ages because of the cost of electricity, but I decided to crank it up again this summer when hopefully it'll be cheaper to run. Now, I've often thought it'd be quite cool to have some sort of a curved seating around the edge of the hot tub to put stuff on, well, I suppose I mean beer. But making something like this curved out of wood was going to be quite tricky, so I decided to combine some local expertise we had in steel fabrication with some old lengths of decking that I had left over from this deck build to create these. And if you haven't got a hot tub, I think these would still make a pretty good outdoor seating feature. So there's not quite as much self-build DIY as usual in today's video, but what I really want to do is to alert you to the fact that certainly somewhere near you there'll be a steel fabricator who could produce something like this. When I built this deck during lockdown, I wanted a large planter to put a big bush or tree in, but I couldn't find anything online that wasn't wildly expensive, and that got me thinking. We've got a pretty awesome metal shop down at our local agricultural farm supply DIY store, and I got them to make this out of 3mm sheet metal. 3 years on and it's still going strong, but it could do with a bit of rust treatment. More on that in a minute. So when it came to this hot tub seating, I decided it would be easier to get a metal frame made than to try and bend or curve some wood. So it's back to James at the metal shop with this slightly crude drawing that I put together, and a template I had left over from the insulated mat I made to go under the hot tub, which was a bit of a disaster if I'm honest. And way back in August 2021, he created these 4 metal frames for me out of 25mm box steel with these plastic blanking plates on the bottom for feet. And the total cost of the 4 frames, £300 including VAT. And believe it or not, they've sat in the garage ever since, getting very lightly rusty. So fast forwarding to now, July 2023, and a thin layer of rust to sort out, I had to decide how to get these licked into shape ready for the bench seat tops. First step was to clean off the thin layer of rust with some wire wool, protecting my hands with the Ansell gloves I've been wearing for many months now, and which I'm currently ambassador for. I love these gloves. There's a link in the description to where you can get them. So what to treat the frames with? I was going to use this Rust 661, which you might have seen me use in the past on my cast iron gutters. The problem with this stuff though is it's most effective in just attaching to the rust itself, and of course we had some decent areas of metal on those legs as well. Also, I want to leave the legs in a sort of clean varnish state, and this stuff I've typically used in the past with Bondo rust primer and then a coloured top coat. So what I decided to use was this paint conditioner and rust inhibitor from Owatrol, which is what I used here, but the difference is this time I'm going to be applying this to the top, which I didn't bother to do last time round with that planter. So with the rust removed as best I could, it was on with the inhibitor. What did I think? Well, pretty satisfying stuff to apply, although it did take quite a long time to go off. Even after leaving it overnight, the frames were a little bit tacky the next day. The varnish was also pretty easy to apply, but set a little quicker than the rust inhibitor, and set to this gorgeous glossy finish, which gives you a lot of confidence that the rust isn't going to get back through. Next up, it's time for the bench tops. This decking was left over from the deck build and has been sat outside the garage for the last few years. I thought it would be ideal for the bench tops and set about cutting 36 pieces, each 320mm long. I created this rather crude but effective measuring stock to make the process much quicker and to remove the faff of measuring after each cut. I hadn't quite worked out how I was going to curve it. It occurred to me that rather than chamfering each single piece, I could just do a 4 per bench, leaving the rest intact, and set about cutting them down to size. And the result? Well, it's quite funky, but I decided the bench would look much better if each piece of decking was properly cut. So I set about measuring and cutting down each one, and with one done, I had a template for the next, and so on. And as you've noticed, to cut these bits of decking, it was back to the good old circular saw. For years now I've used this brush version, but unfortunately it fell out of the ceiling when I was reflooring my daughter's bedroom recently, so the bed's now bent. And as Ryobi gifted me this XP brushless version, to which I've recently added this trend blade, almost a year ago now, I thought I'd put this to the test. Now this is one of the few circular saws that's compatible with a track. And when it came out, I was perplexed as to why they only made it compatible with their own plastic track here, which is almost impossible to get hold of in the UK. But I've got to say, in spite of the fact that it's already showing some sort of wear and tear, although you can of course get replacement splinter guard, it's actually been an incredibly handy track to use on this job. Not 100% accurate, you've got a 2 to 3 mil gap between the cutting edge and the edge of the track, but it chomped through those bits of decking effortlessly, and one battery got through all of these cuts So it just goes to show that brushless circular saws are more efficient than their brushed equivalents, because my old saw would have struggled with that load. Remember, when you're using a circular saw, set it up so just half a blade tooth is poking out below the surface you're cutting. If it's too low, the blade will wander all over the place. And in spite of checking the blade angle with a combination square, the cut wasn't quite 90 degrees first time round, meaning I had a fair bit of planing to do with my electric planer. A bit of a recommendation for you, this superb tracer pencil with inbuilt sharpener, given to me by my carpenter mate John. It's the only pencil I use now, the only blemish being the holder clip has snapped, although this isn't a big issue as it sits in your pocket anyway. You might have seen my decking oil vid a couple of years back. I used Mans at the time, and with that used up, I recently re-oiled my deck with some Screwfix no nonsense oil I had left over from that review video. I've been really impressed with it and decided to oil all the cut edges of the new decking pieces before screwing them down. I agonised over how many screws to use to screw down the decking. 2 on the longer edge would have minimised warping, but peppered the steel frame with a lot more holes, and I decided that as the decking had been outside and hadn't warped for 3 years, chances are it wouldn't now. And in case you're wondering, I use this steel marker pen to mark where to drill. It'd be nice to rely on the grain in the deck as well to stop it warping, but as you can see here with these 2 pieces, we've got the grain running in opposite directions on each piece. A lot of people say you shouldn't have grooves on the way up, and if you saw my what way up to put your decking video a year ago, you'll know that it's too simplistic to say the groove should always be on the underside, because in this case, with the manufacturer's stamp on the underside of the deck, you can see that this decking is clearly designed for the grooves to be this way up. And so, with the exception of the central piece, which had a leg in the way and required 2 screws, I settle on just 2 screws per piece, 1 at each end. If you're planning something similar though, you might decide to go with more for belt and braces depending on the wood you're using. I used a standard 5mm HSS drill bit to drill through the frames and used these 4.5 by 50mm exterior tight outdoor screws to screw each piece down. I experimented with a couple of quick clamps, but in the end it was easier to line up the entire bench top and then carefully hold each as I screwed it down. And actually, with the screws attached at one end, it was easier just to flip the bench over to attach the remainder. We were nearly there. All that remained was to sand down the sharp cut edges to bring them into line with the chamfered edges of the decking, which I decided to do with my random orbit sander and some 120 grit sandpaper. Again, oiling the sanded edges when I was done. And the seating was finished, and I think this can make quite a good outdoor seating area, not just restricted to hot tub use. And that was it, time to arrange the benches around the hot tub. You might wonder why I didn't have a couple more made to go further around the perimeter. I thought 4 benches would be quite enough, but also there are 8 tie down straps on the cover, and it would be a pain to have to move the benches each time the cover went back on. And by having benches spaced like this around the tub, there's only 1 strap behind the bench. And here's me putting the cover back on for anyone out there still skeptical that the benches won't get in the way. And anyone who watched my hot tub cover vid is actually doing surprisingly well. I do regret not doing it without the skirt, because then I could have made the cover a little bit wider. I also ended up covering the foil with Gorilla Tape, because otherwise the foil tarnishes with the chlorine. But the other issue slightly is the foil tape on the top has actually split now, with the end result that the cover has a little bit of a bend in it. But it's not a big deal. As you can see, I'm able to get it back onto the hot tub pretty easily still. So that's it for today. I hope you found this video useful. I know I haven't made the entire bench, but I hope you've learned some techniques on treating metal, an interesting application for that circular saw, a reminder about decking oil, and generally just to keep your eyes open for any steel fabricators in your area for jobs like this, because in this online age we're living in now, our local businesses need supporting. If you live in the Midlands and you want something similar to this, leave me a comment in the comments section and I'll let you know where I got these from. If you liked today's video, it'd be great if you give it a thumbs up. And as I often say, if you're new to my channel, it would mean so much to me to have you subscribe. You can do that by clicking on the link here, and don't forget to click the bell notification icon so you get notified of all my future uploads. See you next week for a bit of a Starlink and home networking update.